Hey there. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a market that's just fundamental, really the metallic cable market.
Absolutely essential stuff.
Yeah, and we've got this market forecast report. It lays out the sales revenue numbers for 2021, gives us projections for 2025, and then looks way out, all the way to 2033.
That's right. And our job today, well, our mission in this deep dive is to really unpack those numbers. We're not just listing them off.
Right.
We want to pull out the key figures from this source, see what trends they show, and, understand the growth story these projections are telling us about this industry strictly based on the data in the report.
It's about getting a handle on the scale, isn't it?
Mhm.
And where things are heading growth-wise in different places around the world.
Exactly. Understanding that direction.
I'm definitely curious. I mean, these cables, they literally connect so much of our world. Okay, let's unpack this. What does the report tell us first, globally? The big picture.
Okay, so the source starts with that global view. Back in 2021, the global metallic cable market, it was valued at 99.8571 billion.
Wow. Okay, so like just under $100 billion to start.
Pretty much, yeah. And the projection shows quite a rise from there. By 2025, it's expected to climb to $117.86 billion.
Mm.
And then looking further out, the forecast for 2033 pushes it up to $164.188 billion.
Whoa, $164 billion by 2033. So that's, what, an increase of over $64 billion in like 12 years?
That's the projection, yeah.
That's a pretty significant growth story just in that global total.
It really is. And the report, it actually gives us a compound annual growth rate, the CAGR.
Ah,
It states it's expected to grow at 4.231%. What's interesting there is that specific rate, it gives you a sense of how steadily the market's expected to expand year on year, according to this forecast.
so steady, significant growth projected.
Okay.
Points towards that, yes. All right, let's start zooming in a bit. Global numbers are impressive, but, where is this growth actually happening, according to the source? Let's look at the regions. Maybe start with North America. What do the numbers show there?
Sure. For North America as a whole, the report indicates, well, solid projected growth. The market value was $28.9785 billion in 2021.
Okay.
Expected to rise to $33.2601 billion in 2025, and then hit $44.8562 billion by 2033.
And does the source break that down by country within North America?
It does, yeah. And the data really highlights the size of the U.S. market. That alone with over $23 billion in 2021.
Right.
And it's projected to reach over $35 billion by 2033.
Hmm.
Canada and Mexico, they also contribute, of course. Canada's market is projected to get to over $6 billion, and Mexico's around $3.5 billion by 2033.
Yeah, it's really clear from those figures just how dominant the U.S. market is within that region.
The numbers definitely show that. The U.S. makes up the vast majority, and it's driving a huge chunk of the projected growth based on this forecast.
So the powerhouse in that region, it seems.
Looks that way according to these figures, yes. Projected to stay that way.
Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic then. How does Europe look in this report?
Europe's figures, let's see. It reported a market size of $22.0684 billion in 2021.
Okay, a bit smaller start than North America.
Yes, slightly smaller base in 2021. The projection is for it to increase to $25.33399 billion in 2025, and then reach $34.8079 billion by 2033.
So still healthy growth projected there too.
Definitely.
And I imagine the source breaks down Europe into specific countries as well. It's a pretty diverse region.
It does, yes. Quite a few are listed. Germany is projected to be the largest market there by 2033, hitting over $6 billion.
Okay, Germany leading.
Looks like it. Other significant ones listed are the UK and Russia, both projected to be around the $4 billion mark by 2033. And then you've got figures for France, Italy, Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, even Luxembourg. They all add, billions more collectively.
Right.
Plus, there's a rest of Europe category, which itself is projected to be pretty substantial, over $7 billion by 2033.
Interesting. So based on these numbers, it's like varied growth across Europe, but pretty consistent overall. Germany holding the biggest slice according to the forecast, but lots of contributors.
That's a good way to put it. The figures highlight those different scales and projected trends within Europe.
Now, you mentioned earlier, or rather the source mentioned, something specific about the Asia-Pacific region leading the expansion.
Yeah, the report explicitly says Asia-Pacific led the global expansion, and the numbers really back that up.
Okay, let's hear them.
The total figures are big, $36.1483 billion in 2021.
Right. Already bigger than North America or Europe in 2021.
Exactly. Projected to grow significantly to $42.901 billion by 2025. And then by 2033, a really remarkable $62.7199 billion.
Wow, okay, $62.7 billion. That 2033 number for APAC is way bigger than the projections for North America and Europe.
It is significantly larger.
So what's driving that? Let's see the entry breakdown.
Well, China is a massive contributor. The figures show its market at $13.9171 billion in 2021. Projected to grow to a striking $25.0879 billion by 2033.
$25 billion just for China.
Okay. And India is another huge driver. It started over $6.6 billion in 2021 and is projected to hit over $12 billion by 2033.
Right. So China and India alone, if you add those up, that's almost $40 billion of the market by 2033. Just those two, according to these figures.
It's huge, yeah. They are definitely major drivers of the regional growth and therefore the global growth based on this data.
Makes sense.
The report also lists other significant markets. South Korea, Japan is another big one, projected over $6.6 billion. Australia, Singapore, Taiwan, they're all projected to contribute billions individually. And there's also an aggregated Southeast Asia category that shows a substantial market projected near $9 billion by 2033.
Okay.
And interestingly, the rest of APAC category, this started smaller at $480.247 million in 2021.
Right, millions there.
Yes, important distinction. But it's projected to grow to over $1 billion, $1.0919 billion by 2033.
So that rest of APAC crosses the billion-dollar mark. Okay, that's noteworthy too. So yeah, Asia-Pacific, clearly fueled by the scale and growth shown for China and India in these numbers, is definitely the leader here, according to this report.
The numbers absolutely underscore that statement from the source.
Right.
It's projected to be the largest regional market and by quite a margin by 2033.
Okay. What about South America? How does that region figure in the metallic cable market?
South America, the market there is projected to grow from $6.1911 billion in 2021 to $8.7216 billion in 2025, and then reach $12.3141 billion in 2033. So a decent increase projected over the forecast period.
$12 billion. And the breakdown within that region. Who are the key players according to the source?
Brazil is listed as leading there. Its market size is projected to reach over $4.3 billion by 2033.
Okay.
Argentina, Colombia, Peru, and Chile are also listed individually. Argentina and Colombia are both projected to get over the $1 billion mark each by 2033. And the rest of South America category is also quite significant, projected to reach over $4.3 billion. Actually comparable in size to Brazil's projection by 2033.
Oh, interesting. So solid growth projected across South America, too. Brazil, the largest single country listed, but that rest of South American numbers suggest pretty broad expansion is expected based on this data.
Yes, the data definitely points to a positive growth trend for metallic cables across that region in the forecast.
Got it. Okay, two more regions to cover based on the outline. Let's look at the Middle East.
Yeah.
What does the report project there?
The Middle East saw a revenue of $4.1541 billion in 2021.
Okay.
It's projected to reach $4.903 billion in 2025, and then $6.0093 billion in 2033.
$6 billion by 2033. And the countries highlighted in the Middle East.
The source lists Saudi Arabia as projected to have the largest market within this region, expected to reach over $2.4 billion by 2033.
Right.
Turkey is also shown as a significant market, projected over $1.3 billion.
Oh.
Then you have the UAE, Egypt, and Qatar listed individually, each projected to be worth hundreds of millions by 2033. And the rest of the Middle East category adds a few hundred million more on top of that.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia looks like the major player within the Middle East based on these numbers, making up a pretty big slice of that regional total by 2033.
That's what the figures in the report indicate, yes.
And finally, Africa. What are the projections for that continent?
Africa's metallic cable market was $2.3167 billion in 2021.
Relatively smaller starting point.
Yes, compared to the others. Projected to be $2.7344 billion in 2025 and $3.4808 billion in 2033.
Okay, about $3.5 billion by 2033. And the country breakdown provided.
The report lists Nigeria and South Africa specifically. South Africa is projected as the larger market of those two. Expected to reach over $1.5 billion by 2033. Nigeria is projected to hit over $900 million.
Right.
And the rest of Africa category is also projected to reach over $1 billion by 2033, which suggests, growth beyond just those two listed countries.
So South Africa appears to be the largest single market listed within Africa based on these figures. contributing quite a bit to the region's total and projected growth according to this data.
The numbers from the source certainly show South Africa with the highest projected market value among the listed countries in Africa. Yeah, playing a notable role in the region's overall projected total.
Okay, wow. We've gone through all the regions listed in the report, the key countries. When you kind of step back and look across all these numbers we've just discussed, the global total, the regional variations, the specific country figures, what really stands out to you, purely based on this data presented here?
Well, what's really fascinating, I think, is how the numbers consistently paint this picture of significant, steady global growth for metallic cables. We're talking about a projected increase of, what was it, around $64 billion over the decade this forecast covers.
Yeah, it's substantial.
It really is. And the report's point about Asia-Pacific leading the way, that's strongly backed up by the data we looked at. Projected well over $60 billion by 2033. That makes it the biggest regional market by a really significant margin.
Clearly.
And while, North America and Europe are obviously still major markets with substantial projected growth themselves.
Right, 45 and 35 billion respectively, roughly.
Exactly. But the pace and just the sheer scale indicated for Asia Pacific in these figures, it really does stand out. And, looking only at these numbers, it strongly suggests, well, it points towards widespread global infrastructure development, increasing demand for connectivity, for power delivery. That seems to be the underlying force driving this kind of projected growth across so many different regions.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Right.
And just to reiterate, these are the projections from this specific report we're looking at.
Absolutely. This is the picture painted by the figures presented in this particular source, showing their forecast for the market's path and where they see that growth being concentrated.
Okay, so just to quickly recap this deep dive then, this report projects the global metallic cable market growing substantially from roughly $100 billion in 2021 to over $164 billion by 2033.
That's the main takeaway number. Yeah.
And Asia Pacific is highlighted as the leader in that growth, projected over $62 billion by 2033. That's considerably larger than North America, projected around $45 billion, and Europe, near $35 billion by that year. And we also saw notable projected growth figures for South America, the Middle East, and Africa presented in the data.
And these numbers, they really underscore a significant projected increase in the need worldwide for these metallic cables. They're just fundamental components for so many sectors.
It really does make you think about the sort of foundational building blocks needed for global development and all the tech adoption we talk about.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Based only on the fact that this report forecasts this much growth across the globe, what kinds of global developments or maybe technologies do you think might be driving this scale of projected demand for metallic cables across so many diverse regions over the next decade? Something to consider, just based on the sheer size of these numbers.
Welcome back for a new deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something really fundamental to our modern world: metallic cables. The wires carrying power, data, stuff we barely notice until it stops working, right? We've got some really interesting sources here, and we want to go beyond just the surface level. Our mission today is to understand, well, not just the basic forces shaping this market, but also how these huge external global events can just completely shake things up for the companies involved. And believe me, things apparently got pretty wild around 2025.
Yeah, it's a great topic because, like you said, these cables really are the critical veins of our infrastructure. Absolutely essential. And what's useful here is our sources don't just give us the market trends, they actually capture the impact of a major external shock. It's quite a stark picture.
Okay, let's start with the market itself then, sort of before that big shakeup. What was driving demand? Sounds like things were growing pretty steadily.
Oh, absolutely. The main engine, really, was rapid infrastructure development, urbanization, especially strong in emerging economies. Think India, the Asia-Pacific region generally.
Right.
As cities grow, new buildings, new networks connecting everyone,
Yeah.
you just see this huge surge in demand. Telecom, power grids, construction.
To directly tied to just building things, expanding cities.
Exactly. But it wasn't just traditional stuff. Another really big driver was the shift to renewables.
Ah, sustainable energy. Okay.
Yeah, large-scale solar farms, wind power projects, they all need incredibly durable cabling, resilient stuff. And metallic options, particularly the metal-clad ones, they're really valued because they last for ages and, stand up to harsh weather.
That makes perfect sense. You need tough stuff out on a wind farm. Were manufacturers just churning out the same old cables, or was tech changing things too?
Oh, tech was definitely playing a part. Keeping metallic cables competitive, You know, manufacturers were innovating lighter designs, stronger, much more resistant to corrosion. And this opened up new applications. Think aerospace, automotive, heavy machinery. It helps metallic cables stay relevant against, say, fiber in some areas.
Okay, so solid growth drivers,
Yeah.
building, green energy, innovation sounds pretty healthy. But like you said, no markets without challenges. What were the main pressures?
Well, the biggest competitor, no question, is fiber optic cables.
Right, for data.
Exactly, especially telecommunications, data centers, places where speed and bandwidth are just critical. Fiber has a massive advantage there. You can just carry so much more information faster. So that puts real pressure on copper or aluminum in those specific applications.
And I guess the cost of metals themselves, always a headache.
Oh, a huge factor. Copper, aluminum, their prices are notoriously volatile.
Yeah.
These unpredictable swings hit production costs directly. Makes long-term planning, pricing, incredibly difficult for the manufacturers, adds a whole layer of uncertainty.
And what about the bigger picture? Environmental concerns are everywhere now. Was that hitting this industry?
Definitely. There's growing regulatory pressure on the whole mining and processing side of metals.
Okay.
And that pressure is pushing manufacturers towards more sustainable production.
Yeah.
And importantly, it's driving this big trend towards recycling old cables, end-of-life stuff.
Recycling. Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yes.
Turning waste back into usable materials. Is that really taking it?
Absolutely. Sustainability, recycling initiatives,
Yeah.
they're really gaining momentum. Our sources actually gave a specific example. Telecom companies actively recycling their old decommissioned copper cables.
Uh-huh.
And it's not just good PR. It turns waste into valuable raw material, feeds back into the supply chain, supports those bigger green goals too.
So besides sustainability, any other key trends shaping where metallic cables are headed?
Yeah, another growing area is demand from smart grid technologies and the Internet of Things, IoT. Now, some of that uses wireless, obviously, but the core infrastructure, especially for high power or critical links where you need absolute reliability, that still heavily relies on robust metallic cables. So getting integrated into these more complex, smarter networks is driving certain types of demand. And we're also seeing more need for highly customized cable solutions.
Custom stuff,
Like
like
you-
for specific industries.
Exactly. Think oil and gas, mining, big data centers. They have really unique, stringent requirements, performance, safety specs that standard cables just don't meet. So manufacturers need to offer tailored metallic products for those niches.
Okay, so the market had these clear drivers, clear pressures, new demands evolving. Now let's pivot to that massive external event you mentioned. The sources talk about a major upheaval in global trade back in 2025. What exactly went down?
Right, so in 2025, the global trade scene got hit pretty hard with the introduction of what the sources call the Liberation Day tariffs under President Donald Trump. The stated goals, at least as reported in our material, were about reducing reliance on foreign supply chains, fixing perceived trade imbalances. That was the framing.
Okay, the goals. But what did these tariffs actually do? What were the specifics? Give us the numbers.
It was a pretty complex structure, according to the sources. There was a flat 10% tariff on imports from traditional allies Australia. The UK were mentioned specifically.
Okay, 10% on allies.
Then, much higher rates elsewhere. Goods from Vietnam faced a 46% tariff. Imports from China got hit with 34%.
Wow. 46% on Vietnam.
Yeah. And on top of all that, there was a universal 25% tariff specifically targeting key industrial inputs: steel, aluminum, and auto parts, regardless of origin.
Okay, just want to be clear for everyone listening. We're reporting what the sources describe here regarding these tariffs and their aims, not adding our own commentary.
Exactly, just laying out what the documents state.
So those are serious figures. How did these policies ripple out? How did they specifically hit industries like electronics, which use tons of cables and components?
Well, the electronics and electrical sectors were reportedly among the hardest hit. The sources indicate a wide range of goods got caught up, critical components like semiconductors, lithium-ion batteries, and also finished goods like laptops, tablets. Some of these products apparently faced just astronomical tariff rates from the U.S. The sources cited numbers as high as 145% in some cases.
145%, just staggering.
It is. And it wasn't just one-way traffic. The sources also note that China retaliated with its own duties.
Ah, okay. Tit for tat.
Pretty much. Tariffs is up to 125% on certain goods, apparently. And China also reportedly restricted exports of some critical minerals, stuff manufacturers need globally.
Right. Again, just reporting the actions described in the source material here.
Correct. So you had tariffs on tariffs, plus potential material shortages brewing.
That just sounds like an absolute nightmare for anyone managing a global supply chain. What are the actual, like, real-world consequences for companies trying to operate?
Immediate massive disruption,
Yeah.
especially for those intricate, just-in-time supply chains.
Right, where everything arrives just when needed.
Exactly. Those systems are built for efficiency, not this kind of shock. The sources give a pretty stark figure. U.S. firms saw their input costs, what they pay for materials and components, jump by an estimated 18% to 25%, almost overnight.
18 to 25% increase.
Yeah. And the ripples went everywhere. Even if companies tried shifting production, say, to India or Vietnam or Mexico, it wasn't a simple fix.
Why not? What was the catch?
Well, the complexity was that often goods assembled in these other countries still used parts or subcomponents that originally came from China.
Ah, okay.
And under these new rules, the origin of the parts could trigger tariffs, not just where it was finally put together. So you could get these complex layered duties. It just compounded the chaos and the costs.
So facing that level of chaos, soaring costs, unreliable deliveries, incredibly complex rules, what did companies actually do? How did they, keep the lights on?
Well, the sources really emphasize that solid market research, detailed supply chain analysis, that became absolutely vital. Survival depended on it. Companies invested heavily in strategies like supplier mapping.
Supplier mapping, like figuring out exactly where everything comes from.
Precisely, literally charting out every single component in every product down to the smallest supplier, tracing it all back. They also focused intensely on something called bill of materials, or BM optimization.
Okay, wait, BM optimization, what does that mean in plain English?
Good question. Basically, the bill of materials is a complete list of every single part and raw material needed to build a product. So BM optimization means scrutinizing that list and figuring out, can we redesign the product slightly? Can we swap this component for another one from a different country to avoid a tariff? Can we find an alternative material?
Ah, got it. So building cost resilience right into the product design and sourcing.
Exactly that. It's about making the product itself less vulnerable. And companies also relied heavily on scenario planning, trying to forecast different outcomes, planning for continued uncertainty.
Were any specific companies mentioned in the sources? Big names taking action.
Yes, actually. Leading tech firms like Apple and Dell were specifically pointed out as actively expanding their manufacturing and assembly operations outside of China during this period. And others, as we just discussed with BAM optimization, were focused on fundamentally redesigning products to make them less exposed to these tariff shocks. The overall picture from the sources is this clear strategic shift. The companies that really leaned into research, that truly understood their entire supply chain end to end, and developed agile, flexible ways to source things, those are the ones best positioned to adapt, to survive, and maybe even find ways to thrive in this really high-stakes, unpredictable new environment.
It really is fascinating seeing these two threads come together. You have the steady sort of foundational trends in the metallic cable market growth from infrastructure, renewables, challenges from fiber, material costs, and then colliding with that is this sudden massive shock from global trade policy. It just hammers home how crucial it is today to understand both the underlying industry stuff and these big external policy shifts.
Absolutely. To kind of sum it up, we saw the metallic cable market has strong fundamental drivers, but it's always wrestling with competition like fiber and those volatile material prices. But then, boom, the 2025 trade upheaval demonstrates how sudden, sweeping government actions can actually be an even stronger force, forcing companies almost overnight to rethink everything, how they source, where they build, even what they build.
Definitely a lot to chew on there. We really encourage you, the listener, to think about how these different forces play off each other.
And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. If these highly optimized global supply chains, built up over decades for peak efficiency, can be disrupted so quickly and so profoundly by policy shifts, what does that really tell us about the maybe inherent fragility hidden within our modern interconnected industries? And in that kind of world, how does continuous learning, that ability to adapt rapidly, become maybe less of a competitive advantage and more of a basic necessity just for survival?
Something to definitely mull over. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.